Hi, welcome to this video for the Pirate Math Equation Quest multi-step intervention where we focus on total, difference, change, and equal groups problems. This video right here is all about difference problems. Now, when we focus on difference problems in Pirate Math Equation Quest, we focus on them a lot during the Buccaneer problems and also during the Jolly Roger review, but students also get to practice difference problems within the ship shape sorting. Right now, I'm going to focus on difference problems within the Buccaneer problems and how we can help students understand what difference problems mean. When we think about difference problems, there are some materials that are very helpful to use to help students think about how they set up and solve a difference problem. First, we've got our UPS check squared attack strategy mat, so hopefully you've got one of those at your fingertips. And then we have our total mat and our difference mat, and here these end up being on what we call the large schema mat. Right now I'm only going to focus on those difference problems, but later on we'll fill this in with change problems and equal groups problems. Every day as we do Buccaneer problems, there's always going to be a student worksheet that they can use to help them understand what a difference problem is and how to set up and solve different types of difference problems. And so students will always need a pencil in order to do this work alongside you. Now, when we get to difference problems, these are just one of the 4 schemas that we emphasize in Pirate Math Equation Quest. Just to review, with total problems, we have parts that are put together for a total. In difference problems, we have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and we compare those for a difference. In change problems, we have one amount that increases or decreases to a new amount. And then in equal groups problems, we always have these groups with an equal number in each of those groups. This video is all about difference problems, but in other videos, you can find that information about total, change, and equal groups problems. Now, I've already been using my hands quite a bit for difference problems, so I want to just briefly talk about the role of gestures within problem solving, and here specifically for difference problems. So in a difference problem, we have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and we compare those amounts for a difference. When I say that, that can help us start to think about whether a problem is a difference problem. But if I used gestures along with that language, it would make it more impactful. So I can say, in a difference problem, we have a greater amount and a lesser amount, and we compare those amounts for a difference. So with my hands, I always hold one hand a little higher, one hand a little lower, and then I kind of shake them back and forth because I'm thinking about this space in between this greater amount and this lesser amount that are compared for a difference. So you'll see me use my gestures as I talk about difference problems, and you've seen that we use gestures as we also talk about total, change, and equal groups problems as well. It's just a way to help students understand the word problems in a deeper way. So there's 2 big ideas about difference problems that I'd like to focus on today. First are difference problems where the difference is missing. In grade 4, and pretty much throughout the elementary grades, when students are working on difference problems, more often than not, the difference is the unknown. Now, could students solve word problems where the greater amount is unknown? Sure. How about the lesser amount unknown? Yes, that could also be possible, but those are pretty infrequent compared to difference problems where the unknown is the difference. But another thing that I want to talk about that we really emphasize within Pirate Math Equation Quest is how we focus on compare sentences and how compare sentences tell us a lot about that greater amount and that lesser amount. So let's first talk about thinking about when word problems have that difference missing, and then we'll focus on that compare sentence and deciding which is the greater amount and which is the lesser amount. So here is our card that we like to use with students in Pirate Math Equation Quest about difference problems. So once students recognize that a word problem is a difference problem, it's helpful for them to go through a difference problem and do the following. First, think about using the difference equation, which we use G minus L equals D, or greater minus lesser equals difference. Then we ask students to focus on the compare sentence and label what's the greater and lesser amounts in the word problem story. And then once they know what the greater and lesser amounts are, then it's pretty easy to figure out what D is, what's the greater and lesser amounts, and then they can write in the signs. Here it would be the minus sign and the equal sign. And then they go ahead and solve for the unknown to find, in many cases, what is the difference, but in other cases, like I talked about, could be the greater and lesser amounts. In our version of Pirate Math Equation Quest, we're only going to work on difference problems with the difference unknown because that's the type of difference problem that students will most likely see in 4th grade and across the elementary grades. So let's go ahead and think about what it's like to solve a problem where the difference is the unknown, where the difference is missing. So here we see a word problem, and I'm going to talk through how we would help students set up and solve this word problem. Now, over here on my large schema mat, I have a reminder that I always want to think about attacking this word problem with UPS check squared. So as soon as I see this word problem, I like to describe a word problem as this mix of numbers and words that students are going to work on. As soon as I see a mix of numbers and words, I need to think I'm going to use UPS check squared. And I'm going to go ahead and write that over here, UPPSS check check. All right, so what do we do here first? Well, we have to understand this problem by reading it. Let's read this problem together. 88 dogs are running in the park. 44 dogs are sleeping in the grass. How many more dogs are running than sleeping? So I have to think about there's more dogs that are running than sleeping. And so I've got a general understanding of this problem, and then I have to underline the label. Well, what do we have to focus on in this story? Well, I'd say we have to focus on those dogs, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and underline dogs right here. And I've got to think about the dogs that are running and sleeping. Okay, interesting. I've got a pretty good understanding of the problem, and I've underlined the label. Now, could I underline dogs everywhere I see it in the problem? Sure, you could go ahead and do that. But I like to be really picky with what I underline. I don't want to get distracted by all of these different lines and circles and all of that stuff. So I'm only going to underline dogs once because now I know I need to focus on numbers that pertain to dogs. And anytime I see a number about dogs, I'm going to ask myself if I need it to solve the problem. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put parentheses around the information and put them in order. So let's see, 88 dogs are running in the park. So I'd say 88 dogs are running. So I've got to see if I can draw my parentheses here. All right, so I've got 88 dogs that are running in the park, right? That's important information there. And I've got 44 dogs that are sleeping. So I'm going to go ahead and put 44 are sleeping right there. And then do I have to put parentheses around any other information? No. But now I've got to think about, well, I've got 88 dogs running and 44 dogs sleeping. And, you know, I'm going to have to deal with all of this information first, all right? So I'm just going to go ahead and put 2 numbers there. Oh, and I'm going to, I see I'm off screen. Sorry about that. I'm going to erase that. No, I knew this was going to make a mess. There we go. All right, there we go. So I'm going to first have to deal with the running dogs and the sleeping dogs. I don't see that this is a multi-step problem, but still I've put my parentheses and I've put them in order. Now I have to focus on the schema, and then I'm going to work on solving this problem. So let's see, I'm going to ask myself some schema questions. Remember, what do you ask yourself? We've talked about that in some of these other videos. So the first question I'd ask myself, is this a total problem? Are parts put together for a total? No, that is not what's happening here. So then I ask myself, is this a difference problem? Are amounts compared for a difference? Yes, because I'm thinking about the dogs that are running versus the dogs that are sleeping. So I'm going to solve this as a difference problem. So as soon as I make that decision, I'm going to go ahead and write my difference equation, G minus L equals D. And I've made a choice about my schemas. I'm going to go ahead and check off that first S. Now it's time for me to solve this problem. I'm going to go back and reread this problem and try to fill in the information into this equation. Now 88 dogs are running in the park. 44 dogs are sleeping in the grass. How many more dogs are running than sleeping? So I see that this sentence here about how many more dogs are running than sleeping, this is what I call the compare sentence. And I can go ahead and put brackets around that if I want. And if I know that more dogs are running than sleeping, so the running dogs are going to be the greater amount, and the sleeping dogs are going to be the lesser amount. And as soon as I make that decision about what's the greater amount and what's the lesser amount, it's quite easy for me to fill in this difference equation. So 88 dogs are running. 88, I like to check that off so I don't get distracted by it again. We already decided that the running dogs were the greater amount. And then I know that 44 dogs are the lesser amount. That's the sleeping dogs. And then I have to figure out, well, what is the difference? I could use a line here. Sometimes I like to be a little bit different since probably some of the other Pirate Math Equation Quest videos. I like to use a question mark there. And I'll go ahead and put in my signs. And now it's time for me to solve this problem. 88 minus 44. How could we solve this? I could subtract, I could add, I could use manipulatives, I could use a number line. But ultimately, I want to solve for this unknown, that the unknown is 44. And then what would be a good label for that? Well, in this problem, we're talking about dogs. So I'm going to go ahead and write D-O-G-S. And I could say, or 44 more dogs are running. So it could be more specific with that. But then I want to go back and check my numerical answer and check my label. So let's see, 44 plus 44 does equal 88. All right, we've checked the math there. And this problem is about dogs. Great, we've checked the label there. And so we have solved this difference problem. Hooray, that's so awesome. So just as a reminder, in these difference problems, we use that attack strategy of UPS check squared that helped guide us step by step. But then we really dug into what this problem means. This is a difference problem where we have a greater and a lesser amount, and we're comparing those amounts for a difference. And that's where we use this difference equation and then all of this other schematic knowledge to help us really get at what this problem is doing. And in this problem, we're comparing amounts for a difference. So if you allow me to erase, I will magically reappear in 5 seconds and we'll continue our difference conversation. Here is a student work sample for a difference problem. Notice that students underlined what the problem was about. Here they put parentheses around things. They labeled whether they were going to use that first, or in this example, just first. They also did their UPS check squared over here. And then you can see here we've got the compare sentence. So how many fewer flowers did Joanne plant than Brad? And so then we're thinking about this greater amount, this lesser amount, and this difference. Students fill in that equation and they solve that to then ultimately solve the problem. And then they have a number answer and a label answer. The student did some work over here to the side. That's great for, especially if they're doing some more complex calculations. But this is a work sample for what we would expect a student to do if they were solving a difference problem. Now, in addition to thinking about difference problems where the difference is the unknown or the difference is missing, one of the things I did in my example was I talked about this compare sentence and I bracketed it, and that helped me focus in on what's the greater amount and the lesser amount. So I want to describe a few different activities that we do in Pirate Math Equation Quest that really help students focus in on that compare sentence to identify the greater and lesser amounts. Let's take a look. So here are some compare sentences that we introduce to students in Pirate Math Equation Quest. And each of these is a separate compare sentence, so they might be embedded within a larger word problem story. And in these compare sentences, what we ask students to do is first bracket where we see the comparison happen. So let's read this first one together. The giraffe is 5 feet taller than the monkey. So right there, we are comparing the giraffe and the monkey. So this is a compare sentence. So I would go ahead and draw a bracket around it to show that it is a compare sentence. There we go. Now in this compare sentence, I think about, well, what tells me about the comparison? The giraffe is 5 feet taller than the monkey. That word taller there kind of cues me in to the comparison. So maybe I circle it to just help me focus in on the comparison. And if the giraffe is taller than the monkey, we would ask students, well, which is the greater amount, the giraffe or the monkey? And hopefully students would be able to say, well, the giraffe is the greater amount, so I'll go ahead and write G by giraffe, and the monkey is the lesser amount. I'll go ahead and write L by monkey. Let's look at this next compare sentence. Katie has 7 fewer cats than dogs. In that sentence right there, we're learning everything we need to know about the comparison of cats to dogs. So it's a compare sentence. I'm going to go ahead and bracket it just like I did last time so I can really, got to scoot to the side a little bit, really focus on that comparison. Now, if Katie has 7 fewer cats than dogs, I might want to circle fewer because I'm going to focus on, that's interesting. Fewer tells me a lot about the cats and the dogs. And so if Katie has fewer cats than dogs, I'd ask students, well, which is the greater amount? Hopefully students would be able to tell us dogs, so I'd go ahead and write a G by dogs. And what's the lesser amount? Cats. That would be an L for the cats, the lesser amount. And once I know that, it's going to be really easy to fill in that equation, G minus L equals D, because I've already identified the greater amount and I've already identified the lesser amount. We've got one more compare sentence here. The ship is 120 feet longer than the boat. So there we're comparing the ship and the boat. I'll go ahead and put the brackets around that because I want to always very quickly identify the compare sentence. And here the ship is 120 feet longer than the boat. Longer tells me a lot about that comparison right there. So I'm going to circle it so I can focus in on that comparison. And if the ship is 120 feet longer than the boat, I'd ask students, well, which is the greater amount? Well, if the ship is longer, that means the ship is going to be the greater amount. And if the boat is like shorter, I'll say, then it's going to be the lesser amount. I'll go ahead and label it there with an L. And so what we've done in these compare sentences is we've really helped students focus in on the comparison. Because once you can identify that the giraffe is the greater amount, the monkey's the lesser amount, or that the dogs are the greater amount, the cats are the lesser amount, or that the ship is the greater amount and the boat is the lesser amount, once you can identify it, it makes solving these difference problems a lot easier. So here is a student work sample from the Jolly Roger Review where students get an opportunity to focus in on these compare sentences. So you can see in each of these examples they bracketed the compare sentence, they circled some of the words that might help them think about the comparison, and then they always identified the greater amount and the lesser amount by identifying those G for greater and L for lesser. Now here is a video where students are solving a difference problem. I'd like you to check this out.
All right, Rose, we're going to do problem B. Do you see a table or graph?
No.
Nope, so what do we write?
U, P, F, F, J.
Awesome, what's our first step?
I understand by reading.
All right, let's read it. Rad planted 465 flowers in his garden. Joanne planted 328 flowers in her garden. Scott planted 99 flowers in his garden. How many fewer flowers did Joanne plant than Rad? A way to check off your step. What do we do now?
Underline the label.
What's our label? What are they asking about?
Plants. Red plant.
Let's look at that question. Yeah, it says how many fewer flowers did Joanne plant than Rad? Awesome. Check off your U. And I also saw a word in there that might help us later on.
I know what it is.
What? What is it?
It's fewer.
More, fewer, less, ER. What does that fewer tell us?
It's gonna have a difference in there.
It's definitely going to have a difference in schema. Good job. All right, let's go to our P. What's our first P stand for?
Okay, parentheses needs a number.
So any numbers related to flowers, but let's be careful. We're talking about fewer flowers did Joanne plant and Rad. So we're talking about flowers that Joanne and Rad planted. So let's read through the problem.
Okay.
Rad planted
465 flowers.
Very good. Do we need that number?
Yes.
Yes, because it's related to Rad and flowers. Let's read the next sentence. Joanne planted
328 flowers. And we don't need Scott's flowers.
Why not?
Because they're saying how many fewer flowers did Joanne plant than Rad.
So they're not asking about Scott, are they?
Nope.
They gave us what?
Just
An extra number, right?
Yeah.
That we don't need. They're not asking about Scott. So what do we do to a number that we don't need?
Cross it out.
We cross that out so we don't get confused and we don't accidentally use it. Nice job, Rose. Did you finish that step? Now what do we do?
Put the numbers in order.
How many numbers do we have in this problem?
2.
2, which means it has to be what?
Oh, it's a
problem. Awesome job. Check off your P. And I think you already figured out the schema even.
It's different.
Yeah, and how do you know that again?
Because it says fewer.
And we know that more, fewer, less, ER words tell us it's a difference problem. Good job, Rose. Check off your schema. Now we gotta solve. So what's our difference equation?
This is the greater, and this is the less.
Good job, Rose. So I saw you labeled G and L, but we also need to bracket our compare sentence. Where's that compare word that you pointed out? Fewer. Yep, so let's put a bracket around the beginning and a bracket around the end. Nice job, Rosie. All right, now what do? Find
The D.
Do we know the difference?
Nope.
Nope, they're asking about the difference. So what do you put under D? Beautiful. Now what do we find?
Now we have the.
Nice. And after you write your numbers, what do you do up here?
We check them off.
All right, you probably can't do that on your hand, so what should we do?
We should stack it.
Let's stack them and do the standard algorithm. Why don't we draw the line and circle the sign?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Nice job. What do you count up?
Okay, now that equals 3. And that's a 1.
You're doing great. Keep going.
Oh, okay.
Looking good. You're doing great, Rose. Nice job, you solved it. All right, what do we do now?
We have to check the number answer.
Yes, how do you check your number answer for a difference problem?
The proud D.
Proud D, what? Grumpy?
Grumpy G has to be greater than everything.
Yes, so is it?
Yeah.
Is 465 greater than 328?
Yes.
Is it greater than 137?
Yes.
Awesome, your numbers make sense. And let's make sure we write our 7 the right way. That kind of looks like an F.
Oh yeah, it does.
There we go. All right, check your label answer.
Okay.
Does it match what you underlined?
Yes.
Awesome, let's read the problem.
How many fewer flowers did Joanne plant than Ryan?
137
Flowers.
fewer flowers. Let's put a little caret and write fewer too. Fewer. Awesome job, Rose.
Thank you so much for tuning into this difference video where we focused on difference problems within Pirate Math Equation Quest. I would like to thank the Institute of Education Sciences who has funded this work over the last few years, and the University of Texas at Austin, and the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk who allow us to do this work on a daily basis. My name is Sarah Powell. Thank you so much for joining this video, and I hope we'll see you in some of our other Pirate Math Equation Quest videos very, very soon. Bye-bye.